The Third Battle of Ypres, also known as the Battle of Passchendaele, was one of the most notorious and controversial battles of World War I. Fought between July 31st and November 10, 1917, in the Flanders region of Belgium, this battle became synonymous with the horrors of trench warfare: mud, rain, and massive loss of life for minimal territorial gain. Today we will explore the background, key events and significance of the Third Battle of Ypres to understand its impact on World War I and military history. By 1917, World War I had been raging for nearly 3 years, and the Western Front remained a brutal stalemate. The British High Command, led by Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig, sought a decisive breakthrough to end the deadlock. Haig was convinced that breaking through the German lines in Flanders would allow the Allies to capture the Belgian ports of Ostend and Zeebrugge, which were vital to German U-boat operations threatening British shipping in the North Sea. Another reason for launching the offensive at Ypres was to relieve pressure on the French army, which had been weakened by heavy losses and widespread mutinies after the disastrous Nivelle offensive earlier that year. Haig believed that a successful offensive at Ypres could draw German forces away from the French front and provide much needed relief. The terrain around Ypres, however, was notoriously challenging. The low-lying Flanders plain was prone to flooding, especially after the extensive shelling had destroyed the drainage systems. The battlefield's geography, combined with the unpredictable weather, would play a decisive role in shaping the outcome of the battle. The Battle of Passchendaele began July 31st, 1917, with the Battle of Pilkem Ridge. The initial British artillery bombardment, which had lasted for over 2 weeks, aimed to destroy the German defences. Around 3,000 artillery pieces fired over 4 million shells, creating a lunar-like landscape of craters and debris. Despite this massive bombardment, many German bunkers and defensive positions survived, buried deep underground. On the morning of the 31st of July, British and Allied forces, including troops from Australia, New Zealand and Canada, launched their assault. They managed to make some initial gains, advancing over 2,000 yards in some areas. However, the weather soon turned against them. Heavy rain began to fall, turning the battlefield into a quagmire. The already devastated landscape was transformed into a sea of mud, making movement and logistics nearly impossible. Tanks meant to provide support became mired, and soldiers struggled to move through the thick, clinging mud. The Germans, who had adopted a defence-in-depth strategy, were able to absorb the initial shock and counterattacked it effectively. The combination of rain, mud and German counterattacks meant that the British could not capitalise on their early successes, and the attack bogged down. Following the failure of the initial assault, Haig and his commanders adjusted their tactics. They adopted a bite-and-hold approach, focusing on limited objectives with the intention of consolidating gains before launching the next phase of attacks. This method aimed to avoid the kind of deep penetrations that had led to catastrophic counterattacks. The battles of Menin Road, Polygon Wood and Broadside marked the middle phase of the campaign. These battles saw the British making slow, grinding progress against well-fortified German defences. The capture of key positions like the Menin Road Ridge and Polygon Wood offered some tactical successes, and the Battle of Broadside resulted in significant gains, inflicting heavy casualties on the German forces. However, these victories came at a high cost. The muddy conditions continued to hamper operations and the weather remained unpredictable. By October, the rains returned with a vengeance and the battlefield once again became a sea of mud. Soldiers faced horrifying conditions, drowning in shell holes filled with water, being stuck in mud up to their waists, and dealing with the relentless artillery barrages. Haig, determined to achieve a breakthrough before the onset of winter, pressed on with the offensive despite deteriorating conditions and mounting casualties. The Canadian Corps, commanded by General Arthur Currie, was brought in to spearhead the final assaults. The Canadians, like their predecessors, faced appalling conditions. Advancing through mud and rain, they managed to capture the village of Passchendaele on November the 6th, 1917. After a series of gruelling assaults, the capture of the village marked the culmination of the Third Battle of Ypres, and the campaign officially ended on November the 10th, 1917. However, the gains were limited. The Allies had only advanced a few miles, and the strategic objectives of capturing the Belgian ports were never realised. The entire campaign had cost the British and their allies around 275,000 casualties, while the Germans suffered approximately 220,000 casualties. The Third Battle of Ypres remains one of the most debated battles of World War I. It epitomises the horrors of trench warfare, the mud, the relentless artillery and the staggering loss of life. For many, Passchendaele became the symbol of the futility and the senselessness of war. From a military perspective, the battle demonstrated both the potential and limitations of artillery-dominated trench warfare. The bite and hold tactic, while somewhat successful, did not translate into a breakthrough. The British did manage to inflict substantial casualties on the German army, wearing them down in what could be seen as a war of attrition. This attrition was a prelude to the final year of the war, where the German army was ultimately exhausted and forced to retreat in 1918. Critics argue that Haig's insistence of continuing the offensive, despite the obvious challenges and horrific conditions, was a costly mistake. They point to the immense loss of life and the minimal territorial gains achieved as evidence of poor strategic judgment. Others, however, argue that Haig had few viable alternatives, and that the British Army needed to maintain pressure on the Germans to relieve the French and prevent the Central Powers from exploiting the situation elsewhere. In conclusion, Passchendaele stands as one of the most infamous battles of World War I. It reflects the brutal realities of trench warfare, the challenges of command and control, and the difficulties of achieving a breakthrough in such a grueling conflict. While it did not achieve its strategic aims, it played a pivotal role in the larger war of attrition that eventually led to the exhaustion and collapse of the German army. Today, Passchendaele serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of war and the complexities of military strategy in one of history's most devastating conflicts.
Thanks for joining us as we took a look at the Battle of Passchendaele. We hope you join us next Sunday at 4 p.m. for another interesting video on history.